had the session. We just, of course, basically on the norms and all of that we discussed last week in the course. But it was an interesting combination of the tech community and the diplomats. That's the 4th time in a row, I think, at the IGFs that they do such a session. And it's amazing to hear the differences and mindset differences. Basically, the difference in understanding what the norms mean for the technical community, for the diplomats, what the timing means for for the CERT community. It's a matter of minutes. For the diplomats, it's a matter of years. Something, and it's a huge difference, huge gap. Now, I'm just putting up the report. I'll show you when I do it. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Daniel, Oscar, Robert, very guy. Good to see you. Well, if anyone wants to join with video or comes audio at least, you can always unmute yourself. Or if you have a chance to use the application instead of a web app, it's easier. Then you can definitely switch on the camera and microphone. In the web version, it doesn't work always. But if not, even we have the chat windows.
Hi everyone, I'll be joining via video. My internet is a bit unstable, so.
Sure, but the audio is absolutely fine, no worries. But you can try if it works. You can try. Okay, I think it's time to start. Well, Stefanie, you didn't expect me, but I will. I will. It's my pleasure to introduce you again, public.
It's a great pleasure, Lada.
I think the participants already had the chance to meet you. I must share the confidential thing from Stefanie's side, that she was a little bit afraid when the week started, that the discussions didn't really pick up. But it goes slowly in the group, so it's building. We'll probably even follow up on that. But welcome to the chat session, weekly chat session. The topic of the week is really relevant. After discussing all the threats and frightening all of us, we are actually moving to the concrete steps that we can do. And I've had the pleasure to work with Stefanie for quite some years already. She was instrumentally involved in the Swiss development of the strategy and the national framework some years ago, and then she moved into the private sector. So it's a couple of hats over there, but with a lot of experience, a lot of good ways to convey the knowledge. So I'm really pleased, Stefanie, you could join us again this year. I won't take much of the time. Well, all of you know the procedure in this format. So basically, Stefanie will present in a way or give a short lecture, and then there will be space for Q&A. But at any point, as you know, and I'm sure you already figured out, knowing Stefanie, even if only to the text, that you can interrupt well, Stefanie, I'll leave it to you to look at the chat, but if you need my help, I can do that. But I know that you're managing that as well quite efficiently, so I'll leave it completely to the dynamics to you. I'll probably be with you for the whole hour, but if I disappear in the meantime, I apologize in advance. Definitely.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much, Rhoda. Okay, so let's get started. Well, actually, it's now close to the end of the class, so policies and mechanisms is an important part, because now we are taking everything we looked at in the entire week, and we are going to formulate something specific. So in order to do that, I still would like to give you a recap of some current numbers. And the upper level is international numbers, and the lower level is Germany. Now, what's striking about this slide, and that's why I'm showing it, it's actually not in particular the numbers you're reading, but it's the source. If you look at the source, you can see that the numbers are from 16, they're from 17, and you don't have actually, and these are supposed to be current numbers in 17. So this shows that we have somewhere a serious gap in being in time with the threat picture and what is actually going on in the world. And this is the number one. I mean, it's like going to war and not knowing what your enemy is like, and how much soldiers he had on the ground, and how much planes he has in the air, etc. So this is one big gap that we are facing in the whole cyber world. And if you look at it, the figures are actually really shocking. if you look at 6 trillion, and that number comes from Cyber Ventures. So Cyber Ventures is, sorry, not Cyber Ventures, of course, not Cyber Ventures. It's Ventures, only Ventures. And these numbers are quite accurate because they are formulated for investors. So I often look into Ventures to see for actual numbers, but also there you look at 17. So 6 trillion by 2021. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we can actually go higher than what we see in these numbers. Now, it hasn't really gotten any better at all. So this, I will come to that at the end in the conclusion. But why is there no improvement with all the efforts? We have baby step improvements, and that is tremendous, great effort. You can see on the lower level 55 billion euro damages in a year for the German economy. And that's just the German economy. That is based on the 1,069 interviews with companies in Germany. Of course, they wanted to remain anonymous. Also, the number, about 53% of German firms have become a victim of espionage. So that shows that espionage trend has severely increased. And the question here is why? And a lot of the time, the why is not being asked. This is an incredibly important slide, and I could easily talk an hour just on this slide and what these numbers indicate. But in a nutshell, number one, we have a problem of having actual current figures on cyber threats. That is attributable to the fact that a lot of companies do not actually report. We have a reporting scheme in Europe, but it works marginally well. In Switzerland, we do not have a reporting. So we do not actually have current figures that indicate the threat level. We have it for specific sectors, for specific countries or areas where it's being reported, but these are snapshots. So we always have to extrapolate from the snapshots. So that much to this slide, but I think it's a very important one when I actually hand over, I mean, I write slides will be given to the class and actually do what you see here and compare them where more accurately. Next slide here. So cyber threats and current examples. So I'm bringing this slide is to indicate that there is a new trend. What we do at Deuter is we assist with the crisis management for companies that have been a victim of a cyber attack, and we help them in the restoration of the systems. Of course, we help them in the hot phase of the attack, but we also help them in the restoration of in the aftermath of the attack. Now, the new trend that we are facing, there should be a fifth column in this slide actually, but it's still too early to add it, so I'm going to just do it verbally. But the thing that we like most is cybercrime, because then we always know there is a blackmail, there is a theft. We had now, all of you are familiar with WannaCry, LockerGoga, phishing mails. These are all trends. They have remained. They are in the upward slope, of course. It's getting worse, not better. But cybercrime, you know what you're dealing with. With espionage, it's getting more tricky, because there are data and information theft. The confidentiality of your systems isn't anymore guaranteed. And that is a huge trend. We can see that the trend has increased by 53% just on that, just deriving from that study in Germany. So overall, globally, it would be very interesting to see figures for Switzerland, for instance, to see what's happening on that front. What is very important, and I noticed that in the hyperlinks, that this is not fully grasped yet. We have to be very careful. When we talk about like cyber war, we have to be a little bit careful, because there's a huge debate going on there. Is there such a thing as cyber war? Does it exist? When can we talk about cyber war? It's more, cyber is an area, technology is being used as a means to a higher end. And this is the most crucial part of this whole cyber threat and our response to this current threat. It's a means to an end. And we are dealing with very resourceful, very motivated cyber criminals who have either a financial, economical, or political goal. They are also militarily, of course, engaged. And that's why I mentioned the cyber war aspect. Militarily, we are actually more facing cyber in war, that you use the technological angle to achieve a higher goal. But there's no such thing as an actual war going on in cyber, because it wouldn't make sense. You need to have a higher goal. Now, of course, if all this digitization increases as it is, we will have no other space than cyberspace, so there will not be much more else in talking about cyber war as such. But at this current stage, we have to be a little bit careful and differentiate when we use these terms. It's being haphazardly used, and it makes it very hard to formulate policies. And I will get to it later when I introduce a few measures for national strategies. If we use cyber for things that are not cyber, we cannot formulate concrete measures to actually overcome the problem. Now, subversion. In the previous class with Vlada, a lot was talked about subversion. It's a huge area. It's a very dangerous area, and technology is being incredibly used to actually engage in this subversive activity. This whole disinformation aspect, you cannot trust the information anymore. What can you concretely do as a state and formulate concrete measures? And that's why I'm showing this slide. Now we have to become a little bit more concrete. The times of using buzzwords and hoping we'll get away with it won't cut it anymore. Everybody's talking about awareness. Everybody's talking about certs. Everybody's talking about international cooperation. But what we need is now a focused approach. Awareness for what? Certs for what? What is my country? What is the weakest link in my country? What is the most critical aspect in my country? And what certs do I need that actually helps me safeguard these assets? The Mexican input was very interesting because it was mentioned that oil is one of the critical infrastructures in Mexico. So you would actually need a cert that is fully engaged in that sector, that knows the SCADA systems of oil, that knows the whole infrastructure of oil. And this is what I mean. We are talking haphazardly about too many things, and we should now focus. International relation for what? With whom? To what effect? You know, not just, it worked until now, but it's become so dramatically increased, this whole problem with cyber, that we now need to focus. And coming back to the initial statement I made, we have now just dealt with a case, and it's dramatic. They've been attacked. They noticed on the 1st of April, believe it or not, it's not a joke, but you can see that these cyber criminals have a sense of humor sometimes as well. It started on the 1st of April in the morning, and it was a whirlwind. It was like a typhoon. 40 minutes later, the entire infrastructure of that company was destroyed, completely destroyed. Then we got the first surprise. The perpetrator called. He didn't send an email in the dark web or anything. He actually called, and he was charming chap, very friendly and nice chat. He negotiated. We agreed on, no, we don't want to pay. And we had, of course, complete police involvement from day one, because the worst you can do is have perpetrator communication without police involvement. And what he did then, as a consequence of non-payment, in the background, all the certs, all the forensic experts, they were working getting the backups restored. And whilst we were working 24/7 on restoring them with our certs and experts, he destroyed the backups and demanded double the ransom. So now you are faced with no backups, no means of getting them back, and a double ransom. What to do? It's a tricky one, and I can tell you one thing, a lot of companies will be tempted to pay. So this puts this whole approach that we have been harboring until now in a slightly different light. How do you advise companies in the prevention phase with their backups? All the backup approaches that we have had, for instance, from Switzerland, from Melanie and all the others similar to Melanie in the other countries. They give, guidelines, checklists, how to deal with backups. Well, if that happens to you, all these checklists are null and void, because they will not help against theft of your backups and especially destruction. And what was also very interesting was he could not restore them, because we made a deal with him and said, if you do this, we will then release what you want to a certain extent, but you will have to prove that you can actually restore the data. And he couldn't. He could restore them to a particular amount of megabytes, but not more. So again, it shows you a different approach is being demanded from all of us. And it's important to know what is the current threat, what is going on, what new mechanisms and measures are being used by cyber criminals, and why. And this, again, I urge you all to think about the slide, think about it in the context of your own countries. And to give you one more example, DDoS. The sabotage DDoS. We had another case, DDoS. And it's always a little bit boring because DDoS is DDoS and you restore it and then everything is hunky-dory again. But in this case, after severe police involvement, severe research, crime mapping on our side, a simple DDoS on a seemingly unimportant company, what we then did is we looked at the company structures and ownership, which became so vast, and at the end, it was organized crime on a transatlantic level. And it was a DDoS on a little, small, German, seemingly unimportant company, and it emanated to be organized crime transatlantic. So again, this indicates it's not always what it seems to be. And these criminals have a clear motivation, and they know exactly why they target you. And I also know why they targeted our customer, because his customer is all the big names that you have in this world. So it's a jackpot thing. So that much to a summary of what you have learned this week in the context of strategy and in context of geopolitics. Where are you? Who are you? In which market are you operating? And who could have an interest in you? That's the number one important thing you have to do. And cyber threats, we are actually going in blind. I have a PhD from war studies, and I can tell you, if in conventional warfare we had to go in like that, we would be in serious trouble. So this is the number one thing we have to work on. Now this brings me straight way back to the strategy gradient. And again, some of the hyperlinks that I came across demonstrated this beautifully. Your cyber strategy has to be linked directly to either your company strategy if you're a company, or to your country strategy. And you can see Mexico mentioned that the certs are, I'm not entirely sure I got it all right with what I'm saying now, so please correct me if Mexico is there. It's attached in the governance structure to the police. Now, a lot of countries do that because they are actually built as a police state. I'm not saying Mexico is a police state, but I'm saying the police has a different role than in democratic countries. It's not this division of roles and responsibilities as we have it, for instance, in Germany and Switzerland. So you would never have a cert directly linked to the police in these countries, because it doesn't make sense from our national structures. In other countries, it makes sense. Look at China, look at North Korea, look at Russia. They have a totally different governance structure, and it's directly linked to their national policy making and national structure of their countries. And if you do not follow this gradient, you will have a total mess at one point, because you need to formulate your country strategy. How are you dealing in this world with other countries as a country? Then you have to have your national cyber strategy, and then only do the IT strategies and ICT strategies follow. Then you also have regional strategies, so these should also be subordinate to the IT strategy. And what you observe in many countries is that they talk about a cyber strategy, and it's actually an IT strategy. It deals entirely with the IT structure of your country. And if you then try to build a cyber strategy, it's usually below. And then you have a mess, because the cyber strategy should give you the overarching guidelines, goals, aims of each section that you as a country decided is important in the context of your critical infrastructures, of your international relations, of your national relations, of your economy. And then you formulate clear measures and milestones, and then only can you formulate an IT strategy that fits the safety of the definition of your strategic assets. So again, this is crucial, and not many countries have actually started that way, and that's why capacity building is so vastly important in today's world. We have all made these mistakes, we have all learned from these mistakes, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel, but we could give these structures which are generic. This slide you see here, it's a generic slide, and anybody can take it and then adapt it to their own quintessential national structures, country structures. And I think this is one of the most important tasks that we have. We developed, or not only developed countries, but those countries who have actually advanced in our cyber strategies. You know, in the paper it's mentioned ITU, and over 192 countries, I think, have cyber strategies. They have cyber strategies, but it's on paper. And our duty is in capacity building to help them actually implement them, and not just have paper strategies, but help them implement it through our experiences and with our structures that are generic. This is a really fundamentally important point. So I did mention already a few examples, but I think that the healthcare sector would be an interesting part to actually show you the ripple effects and give you a snapshot of how in a gradient you could formulate your strategy to make, for instance, hospitals as a sector. See, if you take the healthcare sector, what I said in the gradient before, I go one slide back. You would have, for instance, here, in the gray one, you would have the health sector as a whole. Then you have a gradient coming down saying which sectors below it are important, and then you can start formulating the strategies for them. But the overarching one, this one here, should give the guidelines for all the health sectors that have similar structures. And then you could get some kind of order into this chaos that we are now facing. Now, we had also a customer in healthcare. If, for instance, what they did there was they manipulated the administration. They came in through the X-ray machines. Now, that shows you again how important it is to have cooperation with industry and the service providers and product providers that you are dealing with. You have to have clear service level agreements with them, because they came in through the X-ray machines, because these X-ray machines have vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities are rather difficult to patch, because they are complicated, there are too many of them, and a lot of only the producer of this X-ray machine actually knows what's in it and could actually release the patch. But sometimes these patches take time. The rollout for WannaCry was, 10 years? It's a long time. So you have to have fallback positions for that. So now we know that. We know that X-ray machines, the rollout of X-ray machines in many hospitals have vulnerabilities that cannot really be patched at this point in time. So this gives us, number one, already a to-do list. Now, through the X-ray machine, they got into the administration and mainframe of all patient admission and patient release. Now, the ripple effect there is, if you can no longer trust your system for patient incoming and patient outgoing, you have to, in your emergency plan of the hospital, nothing to do with cyber, close down your emergency section, which means no operation. this is serious, then you have to start evacuating. Then we are not in cyber anymore, then we are in crisis management that creates huge chaos. Once they are in, they could actually manipulate the SCADA system. That means you can manipulate heating, you can manipulate the air shafts, you can manipulate the lifts. And then, of course, no lifts, again, no operation and no evacuation. You don't evacuate anymore if you have no lifts. And these are the ripple effects that you need to be aware of for each sector that you are dealing with. What are the ripple effects? What could happen in a larger picture? And then you can start formulating precise measures. One example here, what could be done is, if you know that the X-ray machines are a target, you create isolated environments, completely isolated environments. You create, as a crisis management, if that should happen, your mainframe and your patient admission system is jeopardized, create isolated but still technically viable systems. Can all be done, but it cannot be done when you are hit with a cyber attack. It has to be done beforehand. And this has to flow into your cyber strategy. And it's not being done that way. It's not being done. And I must say, even in Switzerland, the first one we formulated in 2012 was a very, very good approach at the time. And today it's just an extension of what we did in 2012, and it does not fit current realities anymore. So we are now at a crossroad where more money has to be invested, more time has to be invested, a lot more cooperation on very specific areas. And for me, I'm in the permanent stakeholder group of ENISA. That was one thing I've really been pushing. Get Europe to cooperate as much as they can on data, on information exchange, that we get a bit of a threat picture, because we are really lagging behind. The Americans have now started to create a cartography of the entire internet. They created in the desert centers where they are just researching. China, Russia. Russia is not working with Europe. Russia is doing their private research and their private way of handling things. And what happens all the time when we have a cyber attack? It's China or Russia. First of all, because we very often don't know who it is. And secondly, because they have infrastructures that we cannot compete with anymore. And this doesn't mean that we are not doing it well. We are doing it well, but we are not doing it as cooperative as we should. Focused. You know, we cooperate, but it's all these buzzwords. Awareness. Awareness for what? For cyber? I don't know. For what do we create awareness? For what specific problem? So that's, and I have like 20 more examples like that with ripple effects that you wouldn't even believe it. I give you one more ripple effect, which was an eye-opener for Switzerland. We formulated, we created a cyber simulation war game with all of Switzerland. It was on a national level with critical infrastructures, with the cantons, of course the government, IT. Everybody was for 2 days working on this scenario. And the scenario was an attack on the pension fund system in Switzerland. And long story short, after 2 hours into the game, the armed forces, who were also present as a Ministry of Defense, they had to pull the plug and said, at this point, we cannot trust the data anymore. This means we don't know, because the pension fund system in Switzerland, it's linked to the number. The person is linked to the number, and if you are drafted to do your annual service in the army, the number is an important aspect of your drafting. So if the number and the name cannot be matched, your army doesn't move. No plane goes in the air, no troops are on the ground, which in the case of Switzerland is not so bad, because we're neutral, not many enemies, so to speak. But if you're in a country with nasty neighbors and that happens to you, your army doesn't move. So this is just to show you that you can have national security issues through attacks on seemingly unimportant infrastructures. And the problem is, the perpetrators know it, because they research for years until they hit you. And we are confronted with so many weak spots, and we have to defend every single one of them, which is not possible, clearly. So we have to have a priority list for our critical infrastructures and clean them up and make them safe. I do apologize, this slide is in German, but I'll summarize it and I'll translate it before we send off the slides to the group. Spheres of action. What's important is that you have, as I mentioned earlier, you have to create an awareness for cybersecurity as part of a security culture with a definition of control mechanisms and establish them as a DNA, really, so to speak. But not as an awareness to say cyber should be in your DNA. No, it should be a cybersecurity for very particular areas that you think for your country are relevant. You need, the most important that I haven't talked about yet is special knowledge and capacity. You have to have capacity building for cyber, work with universities together and create an army of cyber experts, which we don't have at this point of time. We have snapshots of people, snapshots here, snapshots there, but we really need to get our people, our cyber specialists on the ground. I'm now faced, I need 10 people. I need to employ 10 people. I don't know where to get them from. So basically what we all do is we steal them from others because the good ones are already employed. And this is not a situation that we can harbor for much longer. We have, for instance, also a lot of close relationships with headhunting companies that deal in technology. They are struggling because they don't have enough people for the jobs that are being demanded. They are recycling the people. And this is one area we really, really have to work. And this area will cost billions. Billions. And we are already missing the train here. We need to get this on the ground. And what's happening until now is everybody's talking about it. But nobody's actually doing it because it costs money and you don't see the immediate result. But without people, we can talk about having certs and what certs should do and how important they are. No good if we don't have the people. Forensic experts. Forensic experts for what? You can't just have a forensic expert for different areas in this world. It's SCADA systems. Every system is different. So we need to get that going. That's crucial. Then we need to have, I think in that area we're doing not too badly, this whole cyber ecosystem and partnerships. We have now in Israel, in the Negev, we have now this CyberSpark that's doing quite well. We have a few centers in Switzerland. We have now a cyber campus. We're doing okay there, but I still think we should work a lot more international rather than national on that aspect. And where I think we are...
Just switch on the camera again, because it was a little glitch with the camera. We can hear you, but switch on the camera again.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries. Go on.
Now, can you see me? I cannot see myself.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, yes, and what's really important is to have crisis management, for medium-sized SMEs, for instance. They have a serious problem, and I noticed that the first time, and that's why at Deuter we're really concentrating on that. When I used to be on panels and talks, everybody asked me, what do we do as SMEs? You're government, you are Melanie, what are we going to do? And I had to tell them brutally, honestly, nobody's there to help you. Melanie's not going to help you because that's not their task, that's not in their job description, so to speak. We advise critical infrastructures and have information exchange, but who helps SMEs? And look around in your countries, who helps SMEs? Nobody. Actually, nobody. And when they can, of course, have SLAs with companies, especially on the technical level, and when they have a problem, they can call up on them and ask them to do the forensic problem after a cyber attack. But if you don't have an SLA, and nobody's going to be there in 24 hours to assist you in restoring your systems, and the 24 first hours are the most crucial. So in the crisis management for SMEs, and why I'm mentioning the SMEs even more importantly, everybody's still talking about critical infrastructures, and we all have our diligence and due diligence that we get our 10 critical sectors in the country, and then the partial sectors, and we all have that. In every country, it's pretty much the same ones. But what's being forgotten largely is that in the larger supply chain of our critical infrastructures are service providers that are SMEs. And they have become, in this global supply chain, extremely, extremely critical. But nobody looks down to them, nobody's actually assessing them. So this will create ripple effects in the long term that is going to really, really have serious implications for our security. So this is the next step. We need to work together to provide crisis management for SMEs so they can supply the critical infrastructures undisrupted. You know, I'm not talking about a hat producer as an SME, but, you know, even if he has a critical component in this world, he's critical. Now, governments are doing pretty well. I think in most countries, governments are doing pretty well. But the weakest link are corporate companies. Having said that, I mean, we had a war game with a corporate company, and it was pretty bad. Not good at all. So companies are still, they need assistance, and there we need to work together. So the spheres of action that I wrote down here are pretty much generic. You can take them, because the topics are large, and then you can actually start formulating them for your own country. But first you have to do the whole work to see what is critical in your country, what you need to develop, where you are active, who could be your enemy, and with whom you actually could create a regional cooperative basis. And having said that again, I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, because that's the international aspect. Well, first of all here, war games, simulation exercises, as I mentioned them earlier, are a super way of detecting ripple effects, vulnerabilities, and then you can build on those vulnerabilities, you can create a cybersecurity framework. Once you've got that, you can have a smart action plan, and it has to be smart because it has to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and most importantly, timely. If you have a roadmap that doesn't make sense, and you have bad governance structure and no specific tasks and milestones, your strategy is a nice paper, but nothing more. And when you then start implementing everything, you need a seriously good governance structure which fits your country. And this is the most important. This is really, really the key to having a good strategy. Switzerland cannot have the same government structure as Mexico or China or Russia. It has to be a cascading effect in line with your national policy making and your country structures. So this slide, again, it's generic. You can take that and you can start working. Now, I have to apologize from talking. I probably missed quite a few of the comments, so I'm hoping that Vlada can tell me later. So this brings me to the next point. It's crucially important to divide your strategy in these three phases: before the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. And we did a war game where we divided the groups. We gave them a scenario. They could read the scenario, and the task was the one group had to come up with preventive measures. What could have been done that this scenario wouldn't have happened? The other group had the reaction. What do you do in the hot phase that you get out of this crisis ASAP? And then the stabilization phase. What do you do to restore your system and get back to work? Because if you are a company like BMW and your production doesn't work for a day, we're talking millions. So you don't want to be out of action for even one day, let alone a week. And surprisingly it was, no, actually it wasn't surprising at all for me. because I've been doing it so often now. The reaction phase, we could dissolve that team and we had to put them back in the prevention and the stabilization, because in the reaction phase is straightforward. You just clean up the systems, you have good forensic experts, you have good certs, and you clean up the system and you restore it, and you see to it that you can actually find a way of isolating the systems and not getting infected more. Basta. That's it. And they know what they're doing. These technical people, they know what they're doing. But where it gets tricky is, what could you have done that it didn't, that you don't have the attack in the first place? And that's the prevention. So we had like 3 pages of preventive measures that should have been implemented before the attack. And then you can actually take these preventive measures in the stabilization phase. What happens there is, you just have yet another bunch of preventive measures. Because if you have not a documented data protection guidelines, if you have not worked clearly alongside of GDPR, that's preventive measures. You just have to get your people to do it, end of story, and that's a preventive measure, and then you are ready when the attack happens. So the key is, we are not ready for the prevention. We don't have preventive measures because we don't know who we are and we don't know what's going to happen when we are being attacked. That is the key. And once they are attacked, everybody has the aha effect, saying, oh gosh, I didn't know that system was connected to that system. Then you ask them to isolate the system in the hot phase. Tell your forensic people, isolate my key component there, otherwise my production won't run. The first question they will ask you is, what is connected to that? I cannot isolate because otherwise I might cut you off something even more important than your production. And then you ask them in the simulation, give me a list of what is connected to what. And they can't. 90% they cannot tell you. Huge preventive task will take you at least a year to come up with a solid plan. But once you've done it, you've done it. And then you can start isolating your system in a hot phase, because then you know exactly what you can cut off and what is unimportant at that particular moment. But you cannot restore the system if you don't know what you're supposed to restore and how. And that's why you need flexible strategies, very flexible strategies that has to be adapted after an attack. The national and international cooperation part. Again, we surpassed the lovely attempts we did at the beginning. At this point, it's too complex, too global, too intertwined. What we need to do is we need to have cooperation with like-minded nations, companies, providers, name it, like-minded. And then we can formulate clear measures that have an effect. If you are in a OSCE group with Russia and the United States, I'm afraid you have nice confidence building measures, but you actually are deadlocked, because they will always, they have their power struggle going on. Russia will block you because they have regional interests. America will block you because they have global interests, etc. So the key here is, in my opinion, you need like-minded corporations. And then you are not safe from an attack, but you are certainly ready to deal with it when it happens. And most importantly, you are ready to get your day-to-day running of your business up and running. This I won't really, you will all get that, look at it. Again, these are very generic measures, shows you just what kind of action areas you could, they are generic, the action areas are very generic, everybody. Yeah? Then you can take measures, you can take milestones, you see the milestones are blank because they are very specific. And with that, you can actually formulate a strategy. This is the last one. I already talked loads about all of this. So again, I'm not going to engage in this. And I also mentioned this. You have to first identify your cybersecurity needs, multi-stakeholder engagement of like-minded nations, and then you just create a strategy and implement it. That's the key to getting it all up and running, I think. And I think I'm at the end now here. Yes, I am. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Stephanie. Quite a good overview. In the meantime, we had some chat in a parallel. I'll retell the main aspects. What we got hooked to probably with the chat was two strategic aspects. So one is related to, let's say, the technical resources in the country, in the institutions, and so on. Most of the equipment that we use is at least in developing countries, but I guess also in most of developed countries, they come from vendors which are out of the country. So basically, you don't have trust. You might not have trust in the equipment that is widespread. That's in data center, that's in networks, that's in whatever, 5G. And we know all the discussions about 5G and Huawei and US and so on, trade wars and mistrust. So one question is there any way, or how do we account this sort of dependence on the foreign technology, which might have vectors, which might be prone to espionage, whatever? Simply there might be lack of trust. How do we count that into any sort of strategic planning? And the second one is similar, but not related to technical resources, rather to human resources. And you mentioned that. How do we make sure that we have people in the country which can follow up on all of that? So that doesn't mean necessarily just people in charge of information security on technical level. It means people in the CERT, for instance, which need to span with the capacities from technical to managerial to international relations and regulation and law and management and so on. Then people that can work in the government, people that can work in or help the SMEs, as you mentioned, with the capacity, so the broad range of national competencies in a way. So to summarize, technical sort of dependence and resources on one hand, and then the human resources on the national level. What could be the strategic view? I know there is no silver bullet, but what are your thoughts?
Yes, there are big topics, Vlad. I think next time we're going to take those two topics and have an hour talk on that. Let me start with the capacity, the lack of actual resources of people in that area. The problem is that, I mean, IT is just not a sexy field to study, most people think. So you don't have a lot of women in that field. And as you say, it's not always IT people that you need. You need strategic people to assist the IT people in the wider complex issue of things. But we need to get, and it's a huge task. I tried to enforce it in Switzerland, and it was totally rejected on grounds of financial reasons. You do need to get cross-border cooperation. I mean, if you look, I like to bring that example because it just shows that it can be done. At the time when I wanted to study, I was 19, which was not a few years ago, but many more years ago. I wanted to study international relations, and it didn't exist in Switzerland. You couldn't really study international relations on the level that I wanted to study it in Switzerland. Today, everywhere you study it in Switzerland, in Germany, it's the topic and the area to study. But you couldn't study it, so I had to go to England. And we need to do the same with countries. You could create, let's take Switzerland again, because it's great with the border, or even Serbia. You have so many borders. You could create at the border universities with IT industry, with communication people, with all the people that make this wheel turn, make this car run. It's not just IT. And in this bubble, you have forensic experts, you have communication experts, you have DiploFoundation. I mean, you mentioned the diplomats earlier. Diplomats are also a target because information is too fast. If you have a cyber attack and you have to talk to the Russian embassy, the diplomat in the country has to be ready and be briefed. So you should basically create competence centers on a university level where everybody is educated to make the wheel turn. And for that, we need the commitment of countries, we need the commitment of governments, we need the commitment of universities, and we need the commitment of the IT industry. And then we need good marketing to make it sexy, so women think it's a good thing to study. I know it sounds trivial, but it's actually not that trivial to do it. And if women knew what dynamic environment this is and how cool it is, and it's not just these hoodie people who don't shower, it's us. I mean, we look pretty smart, I think, and we are dealing with cyber all day long. I mean, I'm telling my family I think I'm the most boring person in the world. I'm always talking cyber, but it's so fascinating. So we have to create incentives that people realize, and also incentives that they realize they can get good jobs that are well paid. Look, everybody wants to study law because, I mean, divorce lawyer, you have so many divorce lawyers because they know people get divorced and you earn good money. So let's create good marketing for this industry and make a sexy industry out of a seemingly boring industry. And then you get the people and do what we're doing now for this last 6 weeks in this online course on a grander scale, in a cross-border, with big universities and big names. But it'll cost money, it'll cost a lot of effort, but it's doable. It's doable. It'll take years, but it'll be doable, and we now have to start because it's going to be too late. Now, with regard to the technical aspect, that's a real bombshell you just came up with, Vlada, I know. Look, the problem is, and it's again a historical, we in Europe have given up our independence, and it's very hard to get it back. I mean, look at the Charter of Trust. They are trying to get security into supply chains. The more security you put into these products, the less it's viable because you cannot bring them on the market in time. So there is a trade-off here in security versus time to market for big companies like, tire makers for cars. I mean, if they followed all the specific requirements to have safe products that have no back doors, I mean, there wouldn't be any cars running anymore on the street. So these are big issues, and to be very honest, I don't really know how it can be overcome at this point in time. I think the only way we can overcome it is to have good cooperation, again with like-minded IT industry, trustworthy IT industry, where you feel comfortable working together with. I mean, if Switzerland is scared to work with Germany because they don't trust them, that happened, by the way, but they buy Huawei and have a rollout of iPhones in the government of a few thousand people, then it's a very misguided policy because the backdoors are in those products rather than in German internet anyway coming from Germany and running through Switzerland. So these are just, you have to have good cooperation. Then what you also have is you have fantastic products on the market. And a lot of people are not aware of these products, where you, instead of creating awareness and torturing your poor employees with these endless spear phishing campaigns to see that from one year to the other 5 people less clicked on it, this is really not going to lead us into the positive, good direction. Sometimes you need to have more draconian measures to create a safety structure in the front, because we can no longer create it in the back. If there is a back door, there's a back door. And if there's a vulnerability there, there's a vulnerability there. And we have no overview on all the vulnerabilities, and then we cannot assess the risk anymore. So the more you cooperate and know what's going on, as in the sense of reporting, cyber threat picture, who is who in the zoo, what is going on in the world, match it to the vulnerabilities, we get a snapshot, but at least we can then evaluate the risk. So I think at this point of time, we need to focus on that, because we cannot eliminate all the problems you mentioned. And with 5G, everybody's running around, great 5G, innovation. You know what that means in a nutshell? That the attackers, everything I mentioned in the first few slides, they also have 5G, and that means they can attack us faster and better. It's all together. And we need to now realize that innovation is linked to security, but you cannot put too much security in, otherwise you don't have innovation. But the people who do innovation need to realize that there is a serious security threat component in it. And through that, I think we might be able to get somewhere. But Vlada, to be honest, I think this is a topic we should focus on a little bit stronger and have it as a special side topic, and just, use maybe half an hour next year to focus on that, because next year I think we will be a lot further with 5G and AI, and it'll make sense.
No, I think the point is, and that's a good wrap up. Basically, you went through all the strategic measures, but in many cases we see the strategies which are short-sighted, and these are the questions which are long-sighted. These are the questions which are fundamental. How do you create the resources which can provide it, well, make the whole model sustainable? If you have people and technology, then you might have a
absolutely
a model. Everything else is, the measures, and as you said, who is who in the zoo. These are the important things, but they are now. This is something that is actually looking ahead. Probably not many countries can look that far away. When it comes to the human capacities, I think there are models. And basically, what you mentioned, we worked together also on this research back then on what are the OECD countries' models on developing competence, national competence. There are models which are attracting the foreign investments, foreign companies that can really invest in the upgrade of a curriculum and get in return some of the people, maybe startups in the country, boost the economy. There are models which can help that. But technology is a different thing because it's so complex, particularly 5G and the others. Area, you have literally two producers on a global level who compete, and much of the equipment. So that's a big question. Maybe, and we see the trend, at least in European Union, that it tries to catch up with the next step, as you mentioned, which is the AI, and that at least the AI part of that, if not the core infrastructure, is something where Europe might be, well, equally or fairly represented in terms of technology, but maybe the other countries can compete with that, because the next parts of the technology, not the infrastructure, won't depend that much on the production. They'll depend on the minds and the people you have. So again, back to the investing in human resources is probably a longer term investment. But to wrap up, I just wanted maybe a tweet response from you, if it is possible. That was the first question, but I think it's quite important here as a wrap up. When we work on a strategy, let's say strategic planning, what is the time frame of revisiting the strategy? Most of the strategies come back or revisiting in years come in, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. Is it enough? Is it too short? Is it too long? What do you see as a trend of revisiting the strategic planning on the national level?
Okay. When I was in charge of the implementation of our strategy, there was a 5-year. The reason for the 5-year revisiting and 5-year roadmap was because it fits into the government financial planning. After 5 years, Parliament gets together and starts budgeting. So you can re-budget what's needed in your security strategy. That's the reason. But what should be done is, it's clearly too long, 4 years, but it should be flexible. You should have measures in there that allow you in this 5-year period to create additional, you should negotiate your budget before you actually start with it, not in a 5-year plan, but you should have a backup financial plan that you can, in the flexible, if you see that things are happening and you need to have them in your strategy, that you can have a fallback position. So the whole, certain of the measures that you will see on the slides should be revisited every year. You should revisit them and see, are we still on track here? Does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, that you can have perhaps emergency budgets, and which areas are the ones that could make your strategy outdated or tumble. So those you have to earmark and get emergency funding for them beforehand, because the 5-year cycle will be in a roadmap something unless a country has a yearly budget review, then you can do it yearly. But normally that's not the case. So that's what you have to do as a flexible way of adjusting emergency measures.
And this is actually an important point that the wishes, even us as a cybersecurity experts or whatever, even if we work on strategies or whatever, they have to match with the realities of politics. And the realities of politics might be, as you said, a 5 years budgetary cycle, and then we have to take that into consideration. That's the reason more why also those that are in cybersecurity not dealing with politics should understand politics, diplomacy, and vice versa. Sort of a holistic understanding. Well, time is up. Thanks a lot, Stefanie, for great input as always. We'll definitely share the presentation if you manage in the meantime to change these couple of slides, which are in German perfect. But we'll certainly share the there anyhow, very useful. For all the others, well, we still have till the end of the day to discuss. If you have any burning questions or thoughts, hypertext is still there. Stefanie is with us. Well, I guess Stefanie will probably get the notifications even in the next days if we get any of the follow-up questions on this topic. But I want to thank you for being with us in the previous week and for all the comments, and for all of you. We are moving as of tomorrow into the last week, which is going to give us the broader perspective, not across the professions, but actually across the three dimensions of the discussions of all the policies, security, but also human rights and economy. So we'll have a guest lecturer as of tomorrow, Ginger, who will help us with mapping the links between security and then human rights, privacy, freedom of expression on one hand, and on the other hand, the development, e-commerce, innovation, and all of these aspects. But more on that as of tomorrow. It was great meeting Marcel in the IGF. I hope we'll have a chance to see or meet the others as well. But if not during the course, then at some other point. Thank you, Stefanie, again, and well, see you in the classroom.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you. Ciao.
Yeah, ciao.